What makes something nostalgic? And why does it seem that the entire world and every movie and TV show relies on nostalgia to do anything? Nostalgia is a longing for a time in the past that was easier and more peaceful, or a period in your life that you look upon fondly, like your childhood. But I think it even goes deeper than that. The feeling that you get when you see someone driving a classic or a vintage car, and you think, well, in 20 years, no one's gonna look at someone driving a 2010 Honda Civic and be impressed. Even our clothes seem to have more character. The toys were iconic. The TV shows and movies were all original. The world felt alive. Or did it? Over the past 10 years especially, so many parts of our life have tried to capture this feeling and the magic of the past. Gen Z is rediscovering 80s fashion. We literally have smartphones that fold now. And so many TV shows and movies rely on their stories to go back 30, 40 years ago to even have a breath of life in a project that probably wouldn't have done as good if it was set in modern day. One of the things I'm sure we're all nostalgic about the most is subscribing down below. But our nostalgia doesn't rely on just one time period. It can be from your own childhood. And personally, I have a lot of nostalgia for TV shows and movies I watched growing up in my formative years. But if it wasn't obvious to you already, this nostalgia is being used against us. And right up at the top is Disney. They are the biggest offender of weaponizing nostalgia. They are releasing sequels and remakes at a rate of 300% more than sequels we got in the prime Disney era in the 90s. So instead of getting 4 or 5 originals and 1 sequel every year, now we're getting the opposite. Back in the day, you were lucky if a movie you liked got a sequel. Now, you can almost guarantee it. But Disney isn't the only one doing this. I mean, look at DreamWorks releasing Shrek 5. Or more egregiously, that 90s show, which fully depends on you enjoying and having nostalgia for the first series that came out 20 years before. And we've even seen this fail for shows before, but it just feels like this keeps happening. The sad part is, we can't put the full blame on the studios, since these live actions and remakes they're making, which are cheaper and easier for them, are opening up to massive, phenomenal box office numbers. Even the Lion King remake, which to many is an insult to the expression and love poured into the original, still made over $1 billion. But that brings me back to my original question. What makes these things nostalgic? Well, I think there's a few things. The generation that is most prevalent on social media and pop culture that make up the majority of the fan bases for these productions are the ones that grew up on the originals. And now that we have automatic response to the source material, it's almost too easy. Not only for personal nostalgia, but a lot of people who have young kids growing up want them to experience the same feeling they did watching the original. So if the only option is a sequel, then what choice do you have? The real problem is that it's rarely the same. But sure, this explains movies we grew up on, things we actually experienced. But what about a time period we never lived in? I think it's really for one reason. We want to feel what life was like in the 80s, before we were all so connected yet still alone, when life seemed that it had color, and possibilities were endless, and pop culture was revolutionized, when things felt easier, which they weren't. Don't get that mixed up. But the world always looks a little more simple the further you move away from it. Rose-colored lenses film most of the nostalgia-driven period pieces that become so idolized today, like Stranger Things. But this also isn't a new phenomenon. In the 80s, they were nostalgic for the 50s. That's why in Back to the Future, one of the most popular films of the time and even still today, when it originally came out, it weaponized viewers' nostalgia by the 50 time periods shown. Now if you watch it, it's for the 80s aesthetic. Now the 80s even has remakes of its own, some that you may not even know about. However, it's indefinitely true that more originals were created in the time that are still loved and idolized today. So why? Well, I think that answer is pretty simple. It's easier. I don't mean that in the sense that it's harder to be original, but the digital age of filmmaking has brought the ability to capture and release 1,000 times easier and cheaper. So why wouldn't these studios capitalize on this? They're constantly having their own little battles over streaming services and social media, trying to be the most popular and get the most eyes on them. These services that most of us use in our everyday life, compared to 30, 40 years ago when you had to go out of your way to deliberately rent a VHS or go to the movie theater, which you most likely wouldn't do for a low effort sequel. But today it's easier than ever to just put it on the streaming platform. I mean, look at Pixar. They put 3 original Pixar movies straight to streaming. That's criminal. Especially when the live-action Lion King and Beauty and the Beast get theatrical runs. They know they can make more money this way by weaponizing this nostalgia for kids and adults alike. Something I constantly try to remind myself whenever I'm feeling particularly nostalgic is that the majority of happiness and bliss live in retrospect, and everything will always look better when you're out of it. It's like staring at a painting from 2 inches away and then 20 feet. What once looked unfinished is now a masterpiece, and you long for the moment of being right in front of it again, so you find a cheap knockoff and stand 2 inches from that. But you fail to realize that you're already standing in front of another painting. Does that make sense? Here's a better analogy. When you have a sore throat or a stuffy nose and you're laying in bed and just think, oh my God, I never took advantage of all those times I could breathe normally. I'm never going to do that again. And then you forget 3 days later when you feel better. But the problem isn't with nostalgia itself. That will always exist. It's really about the overexposure to this subject that has made people start to realize that it's being used against us. Making money is nothing new for these big companies, and most of the time, the decisions to regurgitate the things of the past aren't always made by the creatives working on the movies. It's usually by the suits and the executives who don't care how they fill their pockets. I mean, that's why we had this strike last year, where writers and actors had to protest for months just to assure that companies won't replace them with AI to save money. And that makes it hard because it seems like the only way to beat them is by avoiding these films. And I mean hard in the sense that it's difficult because it's so ingrained in modern day pop culture and social media. And what if the series is good and you just want to go see it? And honestly, I agree. And I don't think we're ever really going to escape the trap of nostalgia bait. I think it's very important to be aware and hold them accountable for the blatant weaponization of it, and stop letting every company and studio get away with it when they say, hey, remember that thing we did that one time that you really liked? How about we do it again? Give me your wallet. So enjoy what you want, and try your best to think critically when you're being taken advantage of. Make sure you guys comment your thoughts below. Subscribe right now if you haven't already. And as always, thanks for watching.